Hamadakyapi, Kola, Iyuha, Ichichab. I greet all of you as friends. I'm delighted, honored, encouraged, and in solidarity with Respect My Vote, with the forward movement that is represented by all of those of us who were born into oppressed demographics. But today, it's my honor, my distinct honor and privilege to be asked to conduct a land acknowledgement. And usually this happens when we're all together, but because of COVID, because of safety precautions, we're doing this virtually. So I want to start by acknowledging Unchi Maka Unkitoapalo, that is Mother Earth, the Makoche Waka na Mini Waka or Mini Wichoni, the sacred sites and the sacred waters that have sustained indigenous peoples, indigenous nations for untold millennia, millions of years. Knows when we got here. We know when we got here. We have knowledge systems that tell us very continent before it was known as the we descend from the land here, and it's imperative in relation to our ongoing deconstruction and reconstruction of what is sacred to us and what informs the foundations of our identities, of our consciousness, of the concepts of what we think we are and who we think we are and how we know who and what we are. Land acknowledgement, it coincides with land back as a prophecy, as a movement. We are putting land back into our lives, land back into our metaphysical navigation, and recognizing that human beings, as a human species, we have an interdependent relationship with the land, the waters, the sacred sites, the cosmos, and the sacred universe. We know also that we've been impacted by an ongoing current colonial process which sought to and still seeks to separate us from acknowledging that we are the land and from pursuing and reestablishing that relationship with the sacred. So as you get your event started and as you come in throughout the entire process, I encourage you, wherever you're at, look up which of our indigenous nations was there since time immemorial and build solidarity together. We're in a crucial time. Our country, those who were racially subjugated and oppressed, and those working class families who are also subjugated and oppressed, are reworking the terms of the social contract as we know it, and the terms under which we're willing to go forward in a new America, one that is prosperous for all of us. So respect your vote and move forward in that spirit. Lila Wopila Tanka Ichichapelo, Madakuye Oyase. All my relations, thank you.
Hey everybody, this is Rev Yearwood, President and CEO of the Hip Hop Caucus. And I'm so excited to be with you at this summit. This is a critical moment in our history and our time. We have been working on getting out the vote for many years because we understand that either you shape policy or policy shapes you. And for too long, policy has shaped us. And this is why your voice and your vote matters more than ever. It is literally life or death. It is the one thing that in the hip hop community we have done so well. So voting is how we express our views. And it's so important that you express your view through the ballot box. You have a voice in what happens to us. And together, we can change not only our community, but the world. So make sure tonight you listen intently, you listen to what's going on, and you make sure you get involved. Thank you so much for being a part of our journey together. All power to the people.
Hey, it's Drinking. Respect my vote 2022. All politics is local. Black people, we got the power. In culture and in politics. Okay? Think about it. Black culture is where it's at. Hip hop, everything. We busting it back down like a brick. Wait a minute, not like a brick. We gonna start from the bottom like a Nutty Buddy. You done been to the store and got a Nutty Buddy ice cream cone before, huh? Remember how you start at the top and eat the little nuts off and then get the cream and then go down to the bottom and bite the cone? We gotta start at the bottom of that cone and bite it and suck off. Get all that goodness out of that cone. Nah, we starting at the bottom. We biting that cone off first. We voting for our local politicians first. That's right. If they running for local government and they round your way, if you ain't never seen them in the hood buying a honey bun or a juicy juice, they ain't getting our vote. All I'm saying is, black people, we got the power, we got the culture, and it's time to make a change in politics. Respect my vote 2022. All politics is local. Back to basics.
John Lewis said, "Get in trouble, necessary trouble, and redeem the soul of America." Soul is an emotional or intellectual energy or intensity. And this is the time to dig deep in yours. Wake it up and turn it on. They think we're running blind again, think we ain't listening or paying attention. We're the spook that sat by the door, gathering information, learning to use what was supposed to be against us for us. Gerrymandering ain't your great uncle. Switching jurisdictions like G5 switching time zones. Corporations against our agenda. Throw political donations to thirsty politicians hoping to influence the ticket and control the agenda of those elected to serve us. We're not going to stop asking questions until we ensure equitable access to the polls. We see your delayed tactics. We take interest in our legislative assembly. No more avoiding the issues. No more alternate facts. Relax with the procrastination and the obstruction. 1964 was a record-breaker delay tactic. We don't have 60 more days to wait. Voting is everyone's civil right. I agree with John Lewis. Your vote matters. If it didn't, why would some people try to take it away? If candidates stop flexing on their promises and live what they preach, they wouldn't be worried about federal voting rights legislation passing in the Senate either. This would give your neighbors that look like you more federal protection against voter suppression. We can't let 33 states ruin a system for national automatic voter registration. Understand the urgency of expanding early voting options across the country, promoting voting by mail, creating standards for national voting machines, and get them out of the 19th century. Each state and every county with a history of discrimination need to run new rules by us. It's voters to get federal approval for new voting laws. This will help us stop thousands of dangerous provisions for taking effect. Since 1965, we broke the barriers of voting. And today, D.C. statehood is still trying to prevent black people from heading to the polls? Marcus Garvey said, "A people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." We need reports from the field. We need everyone on the ground with your boots. In 2013, the Supreme Court weakened our protections, restricting the freedom to vote. You can go to your local reps, take to your social media, and you can help us get it back. Get out early and vote. Request your absentee ballot. Election day, grab some friends and carpool to the polls. The 15th Amendment of the country we hold citizenship in says, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And if we don't do these things to protect our civil rights, we'll be protesting during the day and we'll be planning at night. Because my grandmama used to say, we gotta act now, because without equity for humanity, we are little more than slaves.
Welcome, everyone, to the 2022 Respect My Vote, All Politics is Local Summit. I am Brandy Williams, Organizing Director for the Hip Hop Caucus. I am joined today for our first panel, What's at Stake in 2022, by Ms. Tasia Smith. She is a social media agency owner. Her work focuses on digital activism and social justice work that helps impact Black and Brown communities. In the past, she has built hashtags like Schools Not Prisons, Rise Up as One, People Power, Athletes for Impact, and more. Our next guest is Ms. Desiree Timms, who is the president and CEO of Innovation Ohio. In 2020, she ran a grassroots people-powered campaign that received national recognition and earned the Democratic nomination for Ohio's 10th congressional district. When I was actually preparing for this panel, I came across her cousin, Yellow Pain's video, Why I Don't Vote. And so last but certainly not least, Professor J.T. Snipes, who is an assistant professor at Southern Illinois University. Prior to his faculty appointment, he worked for over 12 years in higher education administration. Our goal here today is really to have a conversation about the political and cultural power of Black and Brown communities and what that means for this upcoming midterm election. We've set the standard from everything from music to fashion. So with this premise in mind, let's discuss how Black and Brown people in hip hop have shaped the political landscape.
As a child of the 80s and 90s, my political orientation came through those groups.
My first time voting was for the Obama election. And just like you said, in previous years, I knew about, what politics were. I was aware of things that were going on, but was I excited about it? No. I got the fortunate, opportunity for my first time to vote was for a Black person. And it was like, hell yeah. I don't know if other people are doing this, but now I'm excited to do it. It opened a really huge door for Black people to really, really get involved. And through the years, we've seen how important it is for not only us to vote, but for us to vote consciously and what type of effects we have on America.
That's exactly right. When my cousin and I sat down to write My Vote Don't Count, a lot of the reason I came up with this song about voting for the 2020 cycle was because I thought we need a schoolhouse rock, but that's hip hop. We created this song that I thought was really catered and tailored to the people in Ohio and nationwide around the world. People were sending emails. Thank you for writing this. I now understand that I'm supposed to show up every 2 years. And I was like, well, or every year. And not every 4 years. People were saying, I thought I was only supposed to show up to vote for the president. And so it's the power of hip hop that has had such an influence on our behavior, on human behavior. I think if everyone goes off mute, Tasia and JT, on this Zoom call, I bet you can finish this sentence and the artist. The only Christopher we acknowledge is Wallace. And that's right. And now you have a burgeoning movement for Indigenous Peoples Day and taking down Christopher Columbus.
So Tasia, let's talk a little bit about your work. A lot of your work focuses on leveraging power to create change. Can you talk about some of the ways in which people can harness their power to make an impact in this upcoming midterm election?
A lot of people like to, exactly what Desiree just said, they like to pay attention every 4 years, or, I only need to vote, in this certain election, or, okay, now they've got it, I don't have to worry about it. And you need to worry. We have never in the history of America have had a good president. The the entire administration, the theory of everything that has been built is found on racism. It's built against, Black people and our oppression. My literal thing that I push so much is that the local elections are the most important. It directly affects you. In that, I encourage people so much to use their power through every single platform that you absolutely can. There's nothing wrong with being a social media activist. Some people can't take it to the streets. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Share those links, sign up for those petitions, call your senators, do all of that work digitally from your home. And so not only voting for 2020 election because everything was at stake, voting this year. There are elections happening across the country this year. There's still an election in November.
We have resources too on respectmyvote.com. So we actually just launched a tool where returning citizens can actually go and see whether or not they can vote. Let's kind of steer a little bit, JT, and talk about one other way that the Black community has leveraged political power, and that's been through the Black church. Can you talk a bit about the influence of the Black church in the political process and how it's, helped to advance rights for our people?
Because I'm a professor, I got to go back. We got to talk about history. And we can't envision the modern civil rights movement without the Black church. It is a cornerstone and continues to be a cornerstone of Black culture and Black life. And in terms of the political power, you think about the figures that came through the modern civil rights movement, thinking about a Dr. King, who was a Baptist minister. You think about the folks like Fannie Lou Hamer and Diane Nash, and all of these figures drew richly upon the Black church. The Black church is still a powerful engine for voter engagement. If we think about the 2018 and 2020 election, there's a very popular campaign called Souls to the Polls that brought a huge number of Black church congregations, either got them mail-in ballots or created caravans to get them to polling sites. The Black church still has power. And one of the things that I love from the Poor People's Campaign is they say it's not about left or right, it's about right and wrong. And I think the Black church is still a beacon that is working for equity, justice, and greater freedom in the United States.
So Desiree, it's been reported that during presidential elections, voter turnout is around 60%. But in midterms, voter turnout is significantly lower, around 40%. What happens at local levels during this midterm time?
Midterm elections are so important because when you care about the schools and the quality of education that your children are getting, you need to care about the midterm election cycle. If you care about your voting rights and the opportunity for clean air and clean water, paved roads, all of that is on the ballot. And a lot of things that we see happening on national TV and Congress, a lot of the inaction we see is actually being enacted at the state and local level, because absent federal action means that these people who are often, under the radar, they are so extreme and they're passing extremist agendas, and we're just sleeping in the night because we aren't aware of it. We have to show up. We have to boost that turnout up to general election and even higher to make sure that our voices are heard, because we are being governed. The majority of us are being governed by a minority opinion.
So we're about at the end. I want to give you all an opportunity to share some last thoughts, comments around this idea of our political power, our cultural power, and how and why we must use that in 2022.
All of the change that we've witnessed throughout history in this country has been led by young people. Keep fighting, stay the course, and continue to participate in our democracy. Without participation, we do not have a democracy.
Every single year is an election year. There's literally no off season for democracy. All we can do is be present, be patient, and be aware. Talk about it amongst yourselves, because there's no greater truster than someone that is near and dear to you. For my community, for the people that are around me, I am the one people look to for voting matters and what to be. And I don't have 20,000 followers. I'm not verified on Instagram, but it's about your voice and your power and you being a trustworthy person.
I knew I should have chimed in first, going after these wonderful, brilliant women. But I'm gonna draw off of some ancestral knowledge from my grandmother and grandfather who said, JT, your voice is your vote. And we know that our voice carries weight. As Tasia said, we are the culture. We create culture. We generate culture. And that's not only in the world of entertainment, but it's in the political world too. That's why so many folks are trying to deprive us of our right to vote. There are tons of movements happening locally within your community. Don't just vote, get engaged in the interests of politics. There are plenty of organizations that are working to make the world better. Ask yourself the question, what do I want to do to contribute to creating a better society? Not just for me and my family now, but for my children and my children's children.
What I expect from my elected officials is strategizing.
For them to actually come with leadership, create change in the communities that really need them the most.
A high level of accountability.
I expect them to be open, transparent, to be caring, and to show up for my community.
It's hard work, dedication, and consistency.
I expect nothing from politicians. 40 out of 50 states are having voting restrictions, racist voting restrictions that are hindering people of color and specifically to say Black people. But don't we also have a Voting Rights Act? They find ways to get around it. So I expect nothing from you.
Stopping the oil fossil fuel industrial complex. Invest in renewable green energy. Invest in clean water. Divest from fossil fuels.
I think that Biden has spoke highly of himself, saying that he was going to be our climate president, and I expect him to take action on that. I think we have to think about what's going to happen later along the line, not how much money the government, along with these fossil fuel companies, can make right now.
Private, but always remind me that if it's the tribe, she didn't mind it. We were from backyard, tag while parents gossiped, and me making the whole studio booth in the closet. It's like no matter how old we get, we still the loudest. Till mine start banging, it's dangerous, man. Turn it down quick.
Wait, the way that she banging, it kind of sound lit.
Now they got me looking up door knocks on the sound kit. You never know the value as much when you around it, but once you realize that you got it, be glad you found it. T-R-I-B-E, believe me, I do it for my tribe. Yeah, those my guys. T-R-I-B-E, believe me, I do it for my tribe. You know the vibes. Yeah, those my people, the ones you keep close. That's all you need, bro. That's all you need. T-R-I-B-E, believe me, I do it for my tribe. Ain't no surprise. Okay.
I made you live and when I was free. I made you live and when I was free.
I really try to see it from the opposite side. Black man dead, white cop is alive. Black man dead, white cop is alive. Black man dead, white cop is alive. No crime committed at the time he arrived. Cell phones corded, but the body can die. It start with what you believe in. Then they influence what you eatin'. Where that fried chicken extra seasoned. And them niggas mad they extra egos. Black on black could kill you too high. That's the new way to ring the noose now. I be watching, don't you think it's too high? Few shots in your cruiser and now you're Tupac. Why? We are not our ancestors, nigga. We been in the pandemic, nigga. They puzzle by the bigger picture. Yeah, we the young black militia. Now bounce that ass, bitch, work, son. I'ma throw this cash, bitch, work, son. Now bounce it back quick, work, son. And shake that ass like it's worth some. No surprise, no explanation. How united you really think the states is? Shit, let's sum it up in a statement. So colonists came to a land with natives, befriended the tribes so they could learn how to stay here. Then killed them off and they called that shit Thanksgiving. Sometimes later they brought the slaves in. Raped all of the women in front of chain men, stripped them from their true name and tried to rename them. Then taught them about a white man that could save them. Blue eyes, blonde hair, that's arrangements. Damn, that ain't Jesus, nigga, that's Satan. Skin of bronze hair, wounds, there ain't no relation. This the new generation and we ain't on no slave ship. We are not our ancestors, nigga. We been in the pandemic, nigga. They puzzle by the bigger picture. Yeah, we the young black militia. We are not our ancestors, nigga. We been in the pandemic, nigga. They puzzle by the bigger picture. Yeah, we the young black militia. Now bounce that ass, bitch, work, son. I'ma throw this cash, bitch, work, son. Now bounce it back quick, work, son. And shake that ass like it's worth some.
What I would like elected officials to know is that our communities have your back as long as we feel like you have our best interests at heart.
I would like for elected officials to know the temperature of their neighborhoods and their community outside of people that look like them.
Their job isn't done once they're elected.
I care about our community, but I also care about them showing up in it. I want them to know that they have to earn my vote. I want them to know that my area and community is just as important as any other area and community.
I want elected officials to know that the power is in the hands of the people, that you work for us, that we pay your salary. Bring us to the table, step back from the table, let us redecorate the table, and then let's talk about how, and let's negotiate, but let us set the tone of the table. Definitely because you're talking about fixing our lives. So shouldn't we have a say in how our lives to be fixed as we're living them?
I want elected officials to know that their actions and lack of actions have real life consequences. Their continuous support and funding and passing laws that uplift fossil fuels, uplift police, go directly against all the demands, all the considerations that the people who bring them into office want. And now is the time for you to change. We're running out of time. People are hurting, people are dying. And if you can't make the right decision now, then you need to get the out of office.
I want elected officials to know that we are here and we're not moving until they make a move. That if they affect our votes, then they have to make it on their promises. Young black and brown people, young people of color are who brought you into office, and we will be the ones to drag you on out.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is a powerful and amazing summit, the Respect My Vote Summit. All politics is local. In this discussion and this wonderful panel discussion that we're going to have, we're going to start off with someone, dear to my own heart because she's an activist, and I love activists. I've been an activist for near 30 years, but she's not only an activist, a community activist, but she's dealing with the area and fighting for racial justice. Welcome, Robin Wright, to this panel. We thank you for honoring us with your time. And also we have my good friend, we call him Doc, but Dr. Roger Mitchell. And Dr. Roger Mitchell, for those that may not know who this brother is, he is the chair of the anatomic and forensic pathology. I had to read this. Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine at Howard University College of Medicine and Howard University Hospital. He's also on the board for the Hip Hop Caucus. As we know, Black Americans have been fighting for basic human and civil rights for just forever, right? We have continued to fight this for decades.
But I want to hear, what fights do you think we have won? And what are the, I guess, top civil rights fights that we should be fighting now or going into 2022?
It is common to look back at things like Voting Rights Act and things like the Civil Rights Act, like Roe v. Wade, right? And we will point to those things like school integration as successes and wins historically, but those are things that are actively under threat. I think some of the fights that we continue to fight and have fought are related to voting rights, criminal justice reform, women's reproductive rights. And those are fights we're continuing to fight and have to continue to stay vigilant about and continue to fight as we move this work forward.
So Dr. Mitchell, same question.
We cannot lose any ground. The greatest thing is that now we can talk about race critically and not just at our dinner tables. But we have to understand that there's still a lot to be done. There's still food deserts, right? There's still lack of access to education. There's still a criminal justice system that sees us as other. There's still deaths in custody. And so it's extremely important for us to recognize our progress, but also be clear that the fight is never over.
You know, and that's the point that needs to be highlighted. The fight is never over. And it's very critical in this conversation of respect my vote, and all politics is local. But let's go back to you, Robin, and let's ask this question. What will you say are some specific issues that Black women should be thinking about as they consider candidates for the midterm election?
My first thought is any issue that Black women should be concerned about is an issue that all people should be concerned about, right? There is no issue that touches Black women that doesn't also affect Black men, right? That doesn't also affect Black non-binary folks, that doesn't also affect non-Black folks in this country. A few things that come to the forefront for me, though, as a Black woman and as a Black mother of a Black child, is economic equity, right? We know that there are so many disparities in income, in wealth, between Black folks and white folks, Black folks and really non-Black folks in general in a lot of cases. And when you scaffold that down through gender, you see that those disparities are exacerbated for Black women. And that's important in part because we know that the community-wide effects of things like mass incarceration ends up putting more economic burden on Black women who tend to have to take on being the primary breadwinners. I also think that reproductive health, so much of that conversation stays in white spaces, but that is a Black woman's issue. The right to choose how we care for ourselves and get adequate health care is critical. Our right to choose how we bring and when we bring babies into the world is critical. Two other issues that I'll name quickly. One, I want to go back to voting rights because everything in terms of who's representing us, what policies come down a pipeline has to do with the vote. So voter suppression is a Black woman's issue. We know that Black women within the Black community mobilize in the community politically at very high rates, right? You look at what happened in Georgia, a lot of the people that folks are pointing to and giving the credit to are Black women who helped to lead that movement, right? And then the last thing that I will say is education. Those are some things that I think we ought to be asking elected officials about and making sure that they actually are thinking about this and talking to Black women to get our voices in the process of co-creating policy solutions for our communities.
So Dr. Mitchell, coming back to you, what should we be thinking about around criminal justice and laws and, coming up in this midterm legislation and, we talk about this midterm and people, politician, what are the things that we should be looking around criminal justice?
I used to be deputy mayor for Washington, D.C., and then also used to be the chief medical examiner for the city. And understanding that a lot of our cities and our country is suffering right now. The violence that we're seeing in all communities that are disenfranchised, poor white communities notwithstanding, is also high. Violence in general, gun violence as we see it, is to me, one of the most preventable injuries and diseases that we see in this country. It's a disease that we find that is promulgated in our culture. It's promulgated in our family. It's promulgated in our media. Communities and individuals that engage in violent crime often have lack of access to the things that we just spoke about, right? And so our reform for criminal justice system requires us to have an evidence-based approach to our criminal justice system and understand that the things that are more upstream are the things that we need to be focusing on and ensuring that we understand that we cannot arrest our way out of any issue that we have. And we need to understand that our returning citizens need support.
Wow. So so what would you say to any elected official? What should they be doing to solve any of these issues as relate to human services and racial justice?
A few things that I would say to folks who are seeking my vote, right? One of the things I would say to them is don't be afraid to talk about race. We come up with creative solutions when it's white folks, right? With the January 6th stuff, they're like, we don't want to put those folks in jail because they might get more radicalized. They don't say that about our Black babies. They don't say that about Black men and women. We don't want to put them in prison because they'll become more radicalized. But we get creative and start being proactive and big picture when it's white folks. Don't be afraid to explicitly call out the racial injustices. Also, it's important to not take Black votes for granted. Too many candidates for office are going about their political campaigns assuming that, well, we won't vote for the Republicans, so we must default to the Democrats, when what's happening is apathy and disengagement as a result because people don't feel like their views, their experiences are represented by our elected officials. And so talking to Black people, listening to Black people, and centering our needs in the process. Messaging matters. I think if you ask the average person if they care about healthcare, if you ask the average person if they think everybody deserves a good education, if you ask the average person, most people in this country will say yes, but that's not the conversation that's happening right now. We're getting distracted and we're not staying focused on speaking to the people and helping the people to see themselves represented in the work that's being driven forward.
If I'm going to have a message to the politicians that are running for office and want my vote is, then they need to prioritize the disenfranchised and the disinherited. And prioritize the disenfranchised and the disinherited removes this notion that that is a construct of race. Because the lie is that there's no poor white people in this country. The reality of it is the majority of white people in this country are poor and do need support. And so when we talk about poor Black people and rich white people, we leave a lot of people out. Right? We leave a lot of people out. And so I think that's the key. And anyone that does not prioritize the disenfranchised and the disinherited really has no place to serve in the public square.
Welcome back. We continue our discussion on our agenda and what we want with fighting for our future. My name is Nikisha Glover. I'm the Think 100% organizer for Hip Hop Caucus. I'm joined by Alana Morrell with Black Women's Health Imperative, Danielle Brown with Black Voters Matter, and Yvette Ariano with Fence Line Watch, and Michael Brown with Sustaining Way. I am inspired by each and every one of these individuals, and we're going to get into the conversation where we are going to explore what a thriving future looks like for our communities and the power of hip hop culture. So I want to start with you, Yvette. Can you talk us through what threatens the existence of Black and Brown communities now and in the future?
It's the fossil fuel industry linked to legacy contamination sites and then the climate crisis. We know that our communities, low resource communities of color, are at the fence line of the climate climate crisis, and we have been for some time, facing not only hurricanes, rising tides, but extreme weather, from the Texas February freeze to droughts that we face throughout our country. We know that we're exposed disproportionately to toxic pollution, whether it's in the form of greenhouse gases or toxics crossing the fence line from oil, gas, and petrochemical facilities, and that this disproportionately affects the Gulf South, a region that is continuously facing issues with education, reproductive rights, gun violence, police violence, and the list goes on. We have failed to see action on behalf of this administration as was promised on the platform. And it is necessary that we declare, or we demand that Biden declare a climate emergency to stop the fossil fuel expansion projects, because our future, our children are at stake. Our communities are undergoing sterilization, and it's important that we move in intersectional ways, rise up our youth, educate our communities, and make sure that we take the stage, because now is the time.
It's happening right now. So the Black family and our community are being threatened. It's violent and it's rampant. Alana, what is climate justice, health justice, and economic justice to you? And how are they related?
Climate justice usually frames climate change as an ethical and political issue. And it is. Black and brown people do suffer more when it comes to health from all directions. And you have the healthcare system that doesn't do us justice. It's usually harder for Black people to find coverage. And it's a known fact that Black people usually receive lower quality healthcare. But the thing is that many doctors don't get the cultural sensitivity training that they need. And implicit bias is the issue. It's a race problem. As far as the economy, our 40 acres and a mule, providing avenues for marginalized citizens to become financially prosperous. It's something that we're all, I think, fighting for. And as far as educational justice, I can speak lightly on this. I mean, I feel like schools and communities ensuring equitable and adequate distribution of teachers who are highly qualified to provide their students with the knowledge they deserve and need to be successful. But I also think it's about the quality of the schools and their supplies, the curriculum, and the support that the students have. So all of it's connected, and all these movements definitely require our attention and action.
Period, right? So one of the things that you mentioned was how it's connected to racial justice. So thank you for connecting those dots. Climate justice is racial justice. Racial justice is climate justice. So let's talk policy. So I'm going to my good friend Danielle, who is the one that I go to when it comes time to talk policy. And I want to get into it. You know, name some recent policies that address these threats that Yvette and Alana just laid out for us, and how they protect or not Black and brown communities.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about policy, let's take it to the head. Like, we're looking at the Voting Rights Act in itself. Like, that is number one right now in what we're fighting for as it pertains to Black Voters Matter, because that trickles to everything. If we can't vote, if we don't have a say in our democracy, then none of this stuff that we're talking about means anything. We saw what happened in 2020. So Black folks showed out, they came out, they showed out, they did their thing, all of that. And in the midst of them showing out, legislation was being written left and right and locally in states to basically disenfranchise and undo everything that we worked so hard for in 2020. So they know the power of our vote. They know what we bring to the table. Because if it wasn't anything necessary, or if it wasn't anything that was powerful, they wouldn't spend billions and billions and billions of dollars trying to keep us from voting. All of these municipal elections that are currently happening right now are the ones that make the decisions on how we live on a day-to-day basis in our prospective communities. So if I've got bad water and I've got an electric bill that's off the chain, and I can't afford to pay for it, but yet and still I can't get a job over here because ultimately jobs are closing and moving across seas, and I can't seem to make decisions over here for myself when it comes to my healthcare. Oh, and guess what? The local the local hospital just closed because we don't have enough census numbers or whatever. All of this goes back to voting, every last bit of it. So when we talk about it, we're talking about taking things from a national perspective and bringing it down to a local perspective to people have an understanding of what it truly, truly means. And when we're talking about the Voting Rights Act alone, the number one thing right now that can ultimately affect how we move in the next few years, we're talking about ensuring that we have some type of democracy on the ground and we have some type of say in our day-to-day lives.
Danielle, I think you dropped something. That mic over there. You dropped the mic. Okay, so let's get Michael into the conversation. You're a former elected official and county commissioner, to be exact, in your community. As we head into the 2022 election year, why is it important for Black and Brown people to engage in the political process and perhaps even run for office? What are the ways elected officials should be addressing these challenges in a culturally appropriate way?
Well, thank you for those list of questions. What I can say is, as those who really control our destiny, we have always had the conversation that when it comes to our communities, economics plays a vital portion of it. But we tie that clearly into the political process in terms of the mobility and movement that we can take as a community. And so all politics indeed is local. You know, for the 12 years that I did serve as a county commissioner, being intimately involved in developmental issues as well as community organizing, nothing has changed in terms of the way in which we should engage our people. You know, strategy can change, the opportunities to engage people through social media, through some of the other platforms that typically have been used in recent times to reach out to those to get the word out. But the word really is that we don't rebuild, we just reload. And so to engage people and find people where they're at, whether it's via the churches, community organizations, Divine Nine organizations, both of our fraternities and sororities, as well as some of our older organizations, civil rights organizations, as well as where we find the need for young people that reach out and you can cry out. And if you hear that cry, you need to respond as an elected official. So you go meet the people where they're engaged. Citizen engagement begins in the process literally of hitting the streets. And so some of that old time, interaction as it relates to what politicians can do, you do need to get out and get amongst the people so you can hear the word. And the word is reflected in terms of what comes from the community. And don't be afraid in terms of being in the political process as an elected official, one who is seeking office, to call it for what it is. You don't have to go along to get along. That's not what we're here for. That's not what we need to do in terms of representing the interests of people. Speak truth to it, and the truth will stand up. And of course, the issues will rise and it will change the process as we're seeing. A number of things that have been said that couldn't happen in the political process. We just take a look at a few states in recent times, both in North Carolina and in Georgia. A few people that you think initially couldn't make that type of impact to make that lasting and consistent change, I guarantee you it's going to have an outcome in recent times, and we'll see in very near times in terms of what's going to happen on the Supreme Court. I challenge people to take the notion that at some point we're going to have an African-American female that's going to be on the United States Supreme Court. And that's going to come from one of these states that have recently had the impact of our local elections that have impacted us and will continue to impact us on a national level.
I heard the call out and the call in, Michael. Thank you so much. We must ensure that we will be here in the years to come, living in a healthy and vibrant way. We must achieve healthy communities and a healthy planet. We are fighting for our future. What do you all most want the people watching to know or to leave with?
I would say that the most important thing is getting information about what's happening to our communities and making it digestible. Like, let's take the technical speak out of the health effects, because scientists and researchers are all good and great. But if that information isn't making its way down to populations that can't read, because we know our communities are most prone to issues with literacy, then what are we doing? If we're not translating that information to communities that speak Spanish or Vietnamese or any other language, we're not doing the work of reaching out. And so let's just make sure that what we learn here, what folks are listening to, share it out, bring people to the Hip Hop Caucus, have them continue learning, and keep the process going.
I would say, well, the panel is titled Fighting for Our Future, and we're doing just that. So even if you're not doing this work as a day job, that one action you can always take is to do your own research and vote. It's your right to know, and it's your right to go and make a difference. And these decisions our communities make to put certain people in power determine our fate. So always vote, know that there's a way out. And I feel like hope only matters when it's backed with action. So stay active. The system is not inclusive or equal at this point, but with your vote and your action in this community, or our community, the generations to come will reap those rewards. And also know that you can advocate for yourself when it comes to your healthcare. You can choose your provider. You are the leader when it comes to your health. And if you feel like you are not being listened to, please change your primary care physician.
Bring the next. Who's your next? Who's the next person? When we're talking about our future, we can't just hold all of it. Like, who is our next? No movement has ever moved without young folks. No movement has ever moved without the energy of that next person. So bring that next person along with you. What does that look like? Who is your next political leader? Which child do you have to keep telling to be quiet over here because they're so outspoken of the things that they see around them? Which child is up here telling you, oh, we got like 5 people that just moved into our house because ultimately they got put out of their other house, being displaced. Listen to what they're saying, because children bring so much energy, but they also bring so much knowledge to help you. I used to tell people all the time, when you're registering people to vote, talk to a kid. And we have to be those ones to advocate for them and bring them along, because if we want any type of systemic political change when it comes to our environment or anything, we've got to have a next, and we've got to start engaging them now.
I would simply say show up, show out, and be the change. Don't wait for certain Sundays that happen every 4 years, and in some instances every 2 years, to hear from people that represent your interests. In terms of touching out and reaching other people, coalition building is so very important. And that's where you're at. So get it how you live. Bring your people along.
Participating peace rallies, ain't trying to change shit. Trying to find a come up from flocking, stealing, and robbing. It's an issue with their hands. Anybody can see those problems. He on anybody's head that comes strolling through the block. Trying to put his section on. He wanna see his hood on top. We didn't get to choose the family we born into. We didn't get to pick the neighborhood that we live. We was just being kids, hanging out with our friends. We didn't get to choose the family we born into. We didn't get to pick the neighborhood that we live. We was just with our friends, product of our environment. This younger kid getting bullied by the bigger kids around the corner. Scared of walking home, he started running to avoid the torture. He was on the dash when he got spotted by his older brother. Pulled up on his side, his brother said, it's time to get you tougher. Told the driver double back, cause little bro gon' get him back. Picked up off the lap, he rolled the window down to point the strap. Aiming out the window, eyes closed when he felt the blast. Used to be some bullies where the newest victim laying at. We didn't get to choose the family we born into. We didn't get to pick the neighborhood that we live. We was just being kids, hanging out with our friends. We didn't get to choose the family we born into. We didn't get to pick the neighborhood that we live. We was just with our friends, product of our environment. Every time he closes his eyes to sleep, he imagine a whore. Influenced by the block to get him backing like they shit up. Whoever killed your cousin, we gotta go and get rid of. The peer pressure building, homies tell him not to bitch up. Besides a couple licks that he hit, he ain't never did much. He gotta prove his heart by stopping somebody else's. Don't fall victim, these environments are selfish. We didn't get to choose the family we born into. We didn't get to pick the neighborhood that we live. We were just being kids, hanging out with our friends. We didn't get to choose the family we born into. We didn't get to pick the neighborhood that we live. We were just with our friends, product of our environment. We didn't get to choose the family we born into. We didn't get to pick the neighborhood that we live. We were just being kids, hanging out with our friends. We didn't get to choose the family we born into. We didn't get to pick the neighborhood that we live. We were just with our friends, product of our environment.
We won't stop fighting for our freedom.
Strange fruit turned to strange truths
about what they think about our place in America.
Jim Crow has come out of the shadows after 57 years
as a secret weapon of oppression.
But we have the tools to write new rules
about the Black experience in America.
And we can't stop,
won't stop until all Black people experience liberation.
By any means necessary.
And that includes me and you, your mama and your cousin too.
We won't stop fighting for joy.
The type of joy that thrives in abundance.
The type of joy that does not pass down trauma like a family tradition.
The joy that compels me to show up and show out
for all of us.
We won't stop fighting. For you.
For me.
For us.
We all we got.
And we won't stop until we reach the top.
And there's that on that. Like they said, Hip Hop Caucus won't stop fighting until we get justice. And we aren't alone in that fight either. Again, I'm Brandy Williams, organizing director for Hip Hop Caucus. And with me are a couple of fighters that are joining us, and they're not going to stop either. So Reverend Nelson Jerome Pierce Jr. is the senior pastor of Beloved Community Church and is the organizing manager at Democracy for America, where he works to advance political leaders who will bring about a more just and equitable world. And Yanaja Halongo is a national community organizer and human rights activist and motivational speaker. Being self-driven, she is living her divine calling from her early beginnings in the entertainment industry as a rap artist and choreographer for BET's own Teen Summit to her most recent work as an active activist and voice against any injustice that affects people worldwide. What we're talking about today is voter suppression. And so I want to start the conversation with some level setting. So when you hear the words voter suppression, what do you think of and how would you define that?
When I hear voter suppression, I immediately think of the Voting Rights Act. And I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, so I think of, Reverend Martin Luther King and so many other civil rights leaders that fought and that organized and, walked all the way to the bridge in Alabama, to Montgomery and from Montgomery to Selma, and I think about all of that in order for us to be able to vote. But then in 2020, 2020, we saw so many voter suppression, especially in the state of Georgia. We saw it with in Standing Rock, North Dakota, within the indigenous Native American community and so many other Native American communities that because they did not have street addresses and we used PO boxes on the reservation. So when I think about voter suppression, I think about how far we have came, but then in recent elections, we still have much more to go.
So historically, we've watched voter suppression play out from Reconstruction up until now. So let's talk a little bit about historically how that's played out and then what that looks like now in current day.
the most obvious form of voter suppression is limiting who has the ability to vote, deciding that only certain people had the right to vote. So it started with only being property-owning white men. And then they expanded it a little more and a little more. And so eventually the franchise, the ability to vote, was able to be spread to cover all people who are citizens of the United States. But that in and of itself took over 100 years of work. What we are seeing now is a different recreation of the same phenomenon. When you restrict where people can vote, when you can restrict how people can vote, when you limit people's ability to vote, not because of technology, not because of money, not because of what's possible, but simply because you want to limit the rules to make it harder for people to vote. That's a modern day recurrence of the same voter suppression tactics.
You know, the Brenner Center is reporting that there have been 19 laws enacted in 33 states designed to suppress the vote. We're seeing a lot of these voter suppression laws impacting Indigenous and Native American communities. Yanajah, how would you like to talk a little bit about what those laws look like and how and what that impact can be for our upcoming elections and the democracy as a whole?
So I'm a part of a coalition called Indigenous Peoples Movement, and we launched Indigenous Votes 2020. And when we launched that, we're a coalition based, so we linked up with a lot of other coalitions, organizations. And one thing that we did was we really pushed the vote. Like, we really had people on the ground to register people to vote. And it was the first time ever in Arizona, especially in Arizona, where they were shocked to see so many Native Americans that came out to vote, and it actually flipped the state. Some of these polls are at least an hour, 2 to 3 to 4 hours away. So having to get to these polls is very, very difficult. Then on top of it, or if you happen to have your ballot and send it in, that could take forever, because once again, the P.O. box is far, the post office is far away. In South Dakota, I know my aunt, it takes her about a good hour to get to the post office. So she's not going to go there until weekly, maybe on a Monday or whatever, but she's not going to go all the time to the post office. So these are the type of suppression tactics that they're doing. And they really saw what our power can do in 2020. And I believe that they're going to really put an emphasis on even more suppressing the Native American vote, especially in places like the Dakotas, especially in places like, New Mexico and on so many other places that you have Arizona, again, where you have such a huge amount of a Native American population.
You don't necessarily see somebody that says, okay, I'm going to stop you from voting. It's very subtle in the way that they set up the laws. If it's an hour away for me to get to the post office, then that means that it's easier if one person takes everything. They're making that illegal now, right? You have to take it yourself, or an election official has to actually take it. It's making it more difficult because they're changing early voting hours, early voting locations, reducing the number of locations and hours, which negatively impact people who work, Black and brown communities, Native and Indigenous communities. That's really to keep us from being able to vote. So if I make it extremely inconvenient for you, then you won't show up. And so that's why it's extremely important for us to know what's happening and do exactly as you're saying, organize that vote, making sure that we get people out there. And so Pastor Nelson, you have successfully organized communities and people in the face of voter suppression. Can you talk a little bit about that work and how you've been successful in overcoming some of these tactics?
Ohio was was infamous because of its own voting challenges back in 2004. People who were voting and remember 2000, what happened in Florida with the hanging Chad and Bush v. Gore, may remember that the next election, the next presidential election cycle, 2004, that drama came to Ohio. And our Secretary of State at the time closed down voting locations while people were still in line to be able to vote. And so in response to that, we created one of the best early voting programs in the country at the time. And in 2008, we had a record number of Ohioans who voted. A record number of people went out and cast their vote. But also what happened in 2008 was that Barack Obama was elected to be the president of the United States, and Ohio was one of the states that went for Barack Obama. And so people lost their minds and said, we've got to stop this. We can't let all of these people vote. And so they immediately tried to cut back and roll back all of the changes that we had just made to our voting system. Changes, by the way, that were led by a Republican Speaker of the House in our state house. I started organizing clergy from around the state and started talking with pastors in Youngstown, Ohio, in Toledo, in Columbus, in Dayton, here in Cincinnati, in Athens. And we got close to 200 clergy whose members were going to be impacted by the removal of weekend voting. We got those stories from the people, and then 150 of the pastors made the trip to Columbus. And we went and met with the Secretary of State, and only 20 of us could go into the room with the Secretary of State, but the other 130 camped out in the lobby of the building and had a prayer meeting right there in the government building while we were meeting with the Secretary of State. And so we went up and we had this conversation, and the Secretary of State was telling us about pressure that he was receiving to make these changes. And we said, you don't know pressure until you see what happens when the 200 churches that are represented by our alliance all across the state move and talk to our members. And if you take away our weekend voting, we are going to converge here in your offices, and you're going to have more trouble on your hands than may be worth it. And so after that meeting, when we finished talking with him, he came down to the lobby and saw the other 130 pastors, and we placed him in the center of the room and had a prayer meeting for him and prayed that God would give him the courage he needed and the wisdom he needed to make the right decision. And so in doing that, we were able to protect weekend voting in Cincinnati. It is still a thing. Now, you say we won, and to some extent we did, but also we lost a lot in that fight because we had what was called Golden Week, where you could register to vote and cast your early vote in the same week. The last week of voter registration and the first week of early voting was the same week. So you could register to vote and vote at the same time. And that was one of the things that we lost in that fight. And this is the nature of the fight. And this is why we need the For the People Act. This is why we need national voters' rights legislation, because if we allow this to happen state by state, even our victories aren't going to really be victories. It's just going to be us limiting how much we lose. And so we need national solution to this problem, because this is a coordinated effort to silence the voices of the people.
So let's talk about what ways that we, the people, can push back on these voter suppression efforts. What can we be doing right now to try to counterbalance some of the things that we're seeing?
Get with the organization that is doing the work that is in alignment that what your beliefs are and what you believe in. And then get with an organization that is constantly at these city council meetings, at these, pushing legislation, learn the law, and then on top of it, volunteer. When we're talking about the vote, if you happen to be Black, also speak for the Latino community, also speak for the Native American community, for those people that are within the alignment of your beliefs.
Get with an organization. The second thing is know who your Congress people are, who your state, who are the senators that represent your state, and who is your local congressional representative, and make a phone call, send an email, tell them that you want national voters' rights legislation to be passed. The next thing is know what elections are coming up, because your senator is going to be up for re-election. Your representative is going to be up for re-election, and make sure you know when it is coming and who to support, because we can change who governs us every 2 years. It's a wonderful thing that we can do. And so you have the ability in the months upcoming to have a voice on who represents you.
I'm so excited to have this conversation with somebody who I truly respect, who was an author and a reporter with Mother Jones, has done some amazing work. Ari Berman. Ari, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Reverend. Thank you for having me. It's great to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about voting, but I got hopefully at the end here, it's like some hip hop stuff. I know you got that covered too.
Yeah, we'll sneak some stuff in.
Got to sneak some stuff in here. So my top line question is, in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, where do we go from here? Community or chaos when it comes to our democracy?
That's right. I mean, that really hits the nail on its head. And I mean, it feels like our democracy has been in chaos for a while. And it just seems to be getting more and more chaotic. I've covered voting rights for a decade, and I didn't think I would see a brazen attempt to just overturn an election. I didn't think I would see an insurrection at the US Capitol. I didn't think I would see the greatest rollback of voting rights since the Jim Crow era following that attempt to overturn the election, following that insurrection. So I think we're really at a make or break moment for democracy. I think democracy is threatened in a way that it hasn't been since we passed the Voting Rights Act in 1965. Democracy was expanded to a lot of people that didn't enjoy democracy for so many years in our country's history. And we're at risk of losing that. And so I want people to really take this seriously.
Well, let's go into that then, because, a lot of folks, those who are probably watching us right now, are from this generation, born in the 21st century or close to it. They also realize most of them are in the moment now where they realize in the 20th century, our parents fought for equality. And while we're definitely still fighting for equality, we're now fighting for existence, and democracy is key to that. So make it plain for them how, when you talk about this is critical, our democracy is on life support, what do you mean by that?
At key moments when rights were expanded for historically marginalized and disenfranchised communities, that's when there's been the greatest backlash. When Black men got the right to vote, that's when we saw white supremacist terrorism to try to take it away. And when civil rights advocates were marching, as you said, in that black and white footage, that's when white power attacked them, with hoses, with dogs, with billy clubs. We're at another moment where there's a new American majority that's ascendant, where African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, other racial and ethnic minorities are joining with more progressive whites who have had an awakening in recent years. And that is the future of the country. And the people on the other end of that, the shrinking conservative white minority, they're doing everything they can to prevent that new American majority from taking power. What was the insurrection at the Capitol all about? They were carrying Confederate flags. They wanted to take America back to a very specific time when white people ruled by force. Jim Crow in the 21st century is different than Jim Crow in the 20th century, but I think it has the same ultimate aim.
What you're saying is that it's become much more sophisticated in some cases. So while our parents fought against Jim Crow in the 20th century, we're not fighting against, I guess, James Crow Jr. Esquire in the 21st century, a much more sophisticated and scarier version of Jim Crow.
That's right. You're not just going to just prevent people from voting outright, like they did in Alabama and Mississippi 60 years ago. There's not going to be outright literacy tests, poll taxes, things like that. What there are going to be is closing polling places in Black neighborhoods, but not white neighborhoods, making you wait online for 11 hours to vote in Black neighborhoods, but not white neighborhoods, making it so that certain people can cast the ballot by mail, like in Texas. If you're over 65, you can vote by mail. If you're under 65, you can't. Well, people over 65 in Texas are much whiter and more conservative than people that are under 65 in a state like Texas, making it so in a place like Texas, you can vote with a gun permit, but not a student ID, right? So they're enfranchising some people, but making it very hard for other people to participate. When they did Jim Crow, they didn't just disenfranchise people for the sake of disenfranchising them. They disenfranchised them so they could have segregated schools, right? So that all the power could be concentrated in the hands of basically a white oligarchical society. That's the same goal now, where when they're talking about criminal justice reform or the environmental justice movement or the awakening that we had in the last 2 years. I mean, voter suppression wants to stop all of that from occurring, right? It wants to stop those movements from having an impact. And that's why you do it. You do it so that at the end of the day, you can achieve a policy outcome that's at odds with where the country is headed and what the majority of Americans want.
Talk about some dark money. You've written a lot about how dark money influences politics. First, for our audience, explain what is dark money, and talk a bit about how dark money is threatening our democratic process.
Well, dark money is basically money where you don't know where it's coming from. It's like the bag of cash you get, and you don't know who brought it to the meeting. What the Supreme Court did in a decision called Citizens United, they basically said that major corporations and political action committees, they didn't have to disclose their donors. I wrote a story for Mother Jones a few months ago, finding that a really big dark money group, the Heritage Foundation, which is one of the leading right-wing think tanks in Washington, that they and a sister group of theirs called Heritage Action, they were bragging to donors behind closed doors that they had written what they called model legislation. They would give them to these Republican state legislators in Florida, Georgia, Texas, and they would say, pass these bills. And that's why we saw so many pieces of legislation restricting voting rights that were virtually similar state after state for state. The only reason we knew they were doing this is because we got a hold of the leaked footage that wasn't going to be public. And even still, we don't know who their donors are. I know the Heritage Foundation raised $120 million last year. It's crazy to me that so much of our political system is being corrupted by people, and we don't even know who's doing the corrupting.
You know, as you're talking, I know people are probably sitting in the back saying, man, listen, Ari's scaring me, and hopefully he is, to get you to move. But they're also probably saying, you know, I've been out in the streets, you know, I've demonstrated. But what you're saying is also that demonstration without litigation and legislation leads to frustrations. We look back at Citizens United and all of these type of things that are happening in the courts or in the not happening on Capitol Hill. How do these threats particularly impact communities of color?
Well, I always think we need an all of the above strategy. I think you need to do it inside and outside, right? Demonstration plays a key role in changing the consciousness of the country. But at the same time, you have to translate those shifts in consciousness into actual shifts in power. And that's what Dr. King and the civil rights movement understood. They were in the streets, but they also were eventually in the halls of Congress, in the corridors of power, trying to change things inside and out.
How can we increase access to the ballot? How can we help protect the principles of democracy?
Well, I think we just need to understand that voting rights are preservative of all other rights. So that if we don't have a strong right to vote, if people can't hold their elected officials accountable, you can't solve all of these other problems that we're talking about. You can't solve the climate crisis or the racial justice crisis or all of the other crises unless our baseline is a strong right to vote. But I think ultimately we need federal guarantees of voting rights and federal guarantees of voting access. Your right to vote shouldn't depend on what state you live in. Congress stepped in to enact the 15th Amendment, giving Black men the right to vote. Congress stepped in to pass the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. Congress stepped in to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And following an attempt to overturn an election, an insurrection, a record number of voter suppression bills, I think Congress needs to step in once again.
You know, in hip hop, we keep it real. You know, that's kind of our mantra, that can't stop, won't stop. So I want you to keep it real here with the audience. You know, as you think forward to the 2022 midterm elections, one, are you hopeful for our democracy? And what should people know about what's upcoming in the midterm election?
Well, I'm hopeful if we have the same focus on voting in 2022 that we had in 2020. Often what happens is people vote in presidential elections and they go home. We saw that with President Obama. People turned out in record numbers in 2008. Then they stayed home in 2010. And then states like Wisconsin and Florida and Ohio, they flipped and they stayed red for a decade because of it. And those were the places that were passing the worst voter suppression laws and all of the other attacks on democracy. It started at the state level before it reached the federal level. And I want people to understand that these local and state races are super, super important for democracy. Who your state legislators are, who the Secretary of State is, who your members of Congress are. This affects your lives in a lot of ways, more than who the president is. We have to show up every 2 years, not every 4 years, every 2 years to make our voices heard in this country. And these state and local elections, they go a long way to determining what kind of democracy we have.
All right, Reverend, thank you so much, man, for this conversation.
Thanks so much, Rev. I really appreciated it.
Hello, everybody. My name is DeJuan Cross. I am the music supervisor for the Hip Hop Caucus, and I'm also a music producer. If you didn't know that. So we're here at the Respect My Vote Summit of 2021, going into 2022, and I brought a couple of my friends along. Rourke Bailey, V Script. These guys are some of the top producers, songwriters in the music industry today. Over 1 billion streams, no lie, over 50 million sold easily between these guys. And, you know, we just did the Speak Up record for Respect My Vote in the Hip Hop Caucus, and our brother Eric Bellinger will be performing that. So I just wanted to, you know, bring my guys on real quick just to, you know, have them say out of their own, you know, words, why it's important to speak up, why it's important to vote. So, you know, let's start with V, you know what I'm saying? You look like you ready to say something, you know what I'm saying, bro? So just tell everybody why you feel like it's important to, you know, use your voice as a writer, you know, and things like that.
I definitely believe it's super important for everybody to use their voice and vote, because especially in the things that you believe in, and especially when you if the things that you believe in, you want change. You want change in certain situations. So you definitely should be vocal about those things. So that's super important. So
definitely. And so yeah, Rourke, you know what I'm saying? Same question, man. You know what I'm saying? As a producer, the musician, why is it important, you know what I'm saying, for musicians to, you know, speak up, use their voice?
Yeah, I think this is such a great cause to be involved in, because I think part of music is about self-expression. So, you know, when it comes to changing your actual situation, you know, I think that voting is one of the powers that we have to express ourselves. So that's part of why I think, you know, it's really important for us to use that vote vote for, like V said, things that you believe in and that you want to see changed and grow. So that's part of speaking up and speaking your truth.
Definitely. I concur. Same thing. And I appreciate you guys for your time. This record that we just wrote, produced, man, it's going to be great. And hopefully, to get some folks to use their voice, speak up, get to these polls, do what they got to do. Respect my vote.
All right, guys. Respect my vote.
Respect my vote.
Make sure you say it louder, cause your voice matters. Don't be afraid to show it. Go ahead and stand up. Don't hold back, you're not alone. Take this chance before it's gone.
My top 3 things on my Black hip-hop political agenda, I would most definitely say the cost of living here, the drug epidemic, and the job search.
Number 1, resource availability. We need that. Number 2, equal voices. We need to have our voices heard, recognized. More Black-owned businesses that are put into the forefront, so that way we can have leverage with building generational wealth.
The top 3 things I will list on my Black and hip-hop political agenda are, obviously, I've discussed transparency. I want to know who I'm voting for. I want to know what they stand for. Second thing beyond transparency is, I would say, local involvement. My third would be economic and local empowerment. It would be, helping build up local businesses.
When it comes to the Black agenda, I want us to understand that all issues cross against racial justice. All issues. So whether we're fighting for climate change, whether we're fighting for reproductive rights, whether we're fighting for the LGBTQ community, Black people are a part of that. It's easy to complain and say that, nobody has our backs, we're at the bottom of the totem pole. But if we're not also doing what we're expecting people to do, if we're not practicing what we're preaching, if we're not mirroring the image that we want to put out into the world, we won't see any progress.
I want people to know the Black history of hip-hop, to respect the Black history of hip-hop and understand where it came from, that it really does have a revolutionary aspect to it, and that needs to be respected and retained.
How we treat each other, like we ain't gonna let nobody disrespect us, we ain't gonna let nobody slide us, you're not gonna let nobody step on your J, you're not gonna let somebody spit on your shoe, but you let people spit in your kid's face, spit in your kid's food, spit in your kid's education. So, if we hold ourselves to accountable, hold the that's hurting us to the same standard, period.
So welcome back, everybody. Again, I am Brandy Williams, Organizing Director for Hip Hop Caucus. And we're here with Shy Speaks and Ms. Teslin Figaro. Simply put, Shy Speaks is Renaissance. As evident in her mission to treat the words, artists, advocate, and activist as one and the same, the female lyricist is expanding her catalog of inspirational music and poetry to showcase a fresh, universal sound. She's been seen on WFAA's Good Morning Texas TV show, featured on a Columbia Records album release entitled Let the Trap Say Amen by Zaytoven and Lecrae, and giving opening performances alongside Ludacris, Ty Tribbett, and Jeezy with her live band. Okay, girl. She is a 5-time Spoken Word Artist of the Year awardee. She's on a mission to bring balance to urban culture through music, lyricism, and the power of her voice. Stay tuned. And so while we're talking about voices, Ms. Teslin Figaro has one of the most powerful voices of our time. She is the founder of the award-winning Teslin Figaro Communications Group and Florida Supreme Court certified civil, circuit, and appellate conflict resolution mediator and trainer. She provides communication solutions, political consulting, crisis management, and customized training to some of the nation's most influential political, social, and cultural leaders. Teslin is also a political commentator seen daily in 55 million households on the National Black News 24-hour cable news channel. Teslin also serves as the senior advisor for the George Floyd Foundation. So, welcome, ladies.
Hey.
So, each one of you in your own right has put pressure to make change. Talk a little bit about some of your success stories, something that you've done to really create change.
I think that we spend so much time trying to come up with one consensus, one way about doing something. And what it does is further delay justice and action. Each of us has our own way of being creative. Each of us have our own way of what I call pushing the line. I think about in 2011, I was a self-employed staffing firm in Orlando, Florida. I had 300 employees. I started my business right out of the recession, going through a divorce, having an infant. And in 2011, after I built my business up, I took the major risk to speak out against city leadership as well as the NBA during the lockout. It was very important to me that people had a voice because as the lockout was going on, my employees did not have the necessary documentation to stay in a lot of the work release programs that they were in. They did not have food for Christmas. Bills were, lights being turned off, which reminds me a lot of what we went through recently in Corona. And so I challenged the NBA. I started a program called Assist the Bench that talked about the employees who were left on the bench. It garnered national media attention. And so as a result of that, not only was my staff taken care of, but also 1,500 other employees. That is one of my defining moments in my career that I felt really proud to make a difference that I didn't think that I could.
The courage that you had to do what was right. And so you're right. When I talk about what the strategy looks like, it's really about what it looks like for you as an individual. You call yourself an artivist, which means that you use art for activism. Talk to us a little bit about, because for us at the caucus, we see that as definitely an avenue and a way to create change. And honestly, that's how hip hop was founded, right? Like our culture was founded on creating change out of, the pain and suffering that we were experiencing. So talk a little bit about art as activism and why you've chosen that as your lane.
It's just kind of naturally who I am. I am a thinker. I am a person who has passion for the community. Like my story, I'm from the inner city. I was born into poverty. Mama was into dope. And somehow out of that, I'm the one out here pushing hope, right? And so I'm the typical drug baby and so forth and so on. I'm the whole trap. I'm the whole trap explanation. Like that's me. I'm the kid that comes out of that. And so what we see a lot of times in hip hop is people who talk about that struggle, and they talk about it from one side of how, but I believe that there's another side, right? And I know that there's another side because I am the other side. I was born into an environment where I was probably disenfranchised and at risk and all the other words that people will say. But I also have the gift of music, the gift of song, the gift of lyricism. And so what better way to tell the other side of the story or to make sure that the other side of the story is told than to tell it myself. I hope that I will be able to be a representation to some other young girl who's MC, who can look at me and say she actually is from this context, but she's taken the opportunity to use her gifts and point towards something positive and some type of change. So.
That's dope. And I know I relate to what you're saying. So I think there's so many different ways that we can be activists and that we can show up and create change. And again, going back to your original point, that it's about us thinking about what that looks like for us. And I know that you do a lot to help others kind of find their lane. You want to talk a little bit about how you got to this place and then how you're helping others actually recognize and realize their place in the movement.
Everybody's role is different. Sometimes you may be Moses, sometimes you may be Aaron, who is the communicator. When Moses couldn't think of the words to say, it wasn't that he was not gifted and could not speak, but he was not gifted in the area of communication. So he had Aaron that was sent with him. So you can say, okay, Shai is here to give this book of song. And then you have the book of Judges, which is Deborah, who is my biblical mentor, which is the one that calls folks out and actually applies pressure. Not necessarily getting along to get along, or we want to be, all kind of kumbaya. My role is to be Deborah from the book of Judges. Know what your role is, and if it's a career, if it's a calling, whatever it is, and be committed to it most of all, because time's gonna tell who's real in this and who's not. And right now we're seeing who's really about this work and who's not. And it's no diss to them. but I'm challenging them to get behind somebody that is trying to continue this conversation, whether it is a civilized conversation with my sister Shy, or if it's checking them with Tesla and Figaro that don't do nothing but check folks on TV. Get behind one of us or get behind both, because both are necessary.
I think you went to church on us a little bit.
Always.
She was in that thing. Listen, the calling.
Right.
Sure.
So I had an organization back in the day called Juice Crew, and it was really about exactly what we're talking about. Everybody has the power to create change within yourself. And so in that, and if we had to put together a list of things that that people should consider when they're thinking about what it looks like to find their way in this fight, you got to be able to challenge the status quo. Yep. We want to walk in your purpose or your calling. So whatever that is, right? You want to be able to find that and walk in that and collaborate. Understand your role. Once you find your purpose, don't try to do something outside of that. Collaborate. Bring other people to the table. Leave your ego at the door and work towards solutions. Like Tesla said, she had this staffing agency and she saw what it was doing to her employees. Courage, everything on the line. Like she said, she put it all on the line to be able to support other people. That's what this looks like. That's what it looks like to be able to create pressure, to be a part of the pressure squad, which is what we call anybody out here putting their lives on the line every single day to create change for greater good. So any final thoughts, Shy?
I 100% agree with what Tesla was saying and what the mission of this panel is all about. It is a multi-pronged problem, so it's going to require a multi-pronged approach. I identify with the aspect of it being a calling to do this, but I also know that, like, the way I say it is I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to reinfuse positivity and spirituality into urban culture through the arts, right? And the power of my voice. And the reason why, and people say, why do you specifically say urban culture, or particularly, or even hip hop community, is because I understand that urban culture influences pop culture. Hip hop community influences the community at large. And when you influence the community at large, you are actually influencing the world. So we actually have a lot of influence. We have a lot of power, which means we have a lot of responsibility. And instead of me looking around at you, if you're listening, instead of you looking around figuring out who else is going to do it or who could be doing it, you could be doing it in your own way. That's what I want to say.
You call this the pressure squad. Pressure is that. Pressure doesn't feel good. Pressure is not passive aggressive. Pressure is not, applause. Pressure is not, pretty please. Pressure is exactly just that. And hip hop demographic is the least of these. We have positive things. We have things we talk about in hip hop. We have things, but usually that positive story that we share is the other side of the pain that we experience. Oh, that's a word. I got to write that down. Let me say it again. That positive story we share is on the other side of pain. And that pain is what the least of these experience. So if we are not catering to them and putting them first above your contract, your desire to get likes and clicks and fanfare, then we are failing our culture, our community, and our people, and most of all ourselves and the creator.
Woo! I knew it! As you can see by the conversations we've had tonight, Ish is real. There are real threats to our existence, from the climate crisis to voter suppression and lack of accountability in criminal and human justice. People are coming for us, and we ain't even sent for them. But the reality is, we've got the power to stop them. As our homegirls Desiree Timms and Tasia Smith said, we are the majority. And all we have to do to stop the threats on our lives is be aware, be educated, stay engaged, and participate in our democracy. RespectMyVote.com is hip-hop's best source for being educated, staying engaged in the democratic process. On the website, you are able to learn how to vote by checking state-by-state voter guidelines, voter registration deadlines, and rules for voting if you are a college student or a returning citizen. This year, we launched the Returning Citizens Voting Tool, a free tool that helps returning citizens, people with a felony or misdemeanor, find out if they are eligible to vote. The tool guides users through 2 to 5 questions to determine their eligibility to vote in their state or U.S. territory. If eligible, the tool will register them to vote. The tool is built to be anonymous, and Hip Hop Caucus will not store or share the data of those who use it, ensuring returning citizens feel comfortable using the website. Additionally, RespectMyVote.com allows you to take action on the site by pledging to vote, getting election reminders, requesting absentee ballots, and volunteering to be an agent of change in your community. RespectMyVote.com is not the only way to stay informed and engaged. We invite you to join the fight for democracy by texting VOTE, VOTE, to 66539 to get up-to-the-minute information, actions, and reminders. Remember, there is no off-season for democracy. We have to stay vigilant and empowered. When they say we the people, they mean us. We are the people. We are the majority. We have the power. All power to the people. Ashe.
But we both play blind, hearing clearly as the time flies by. Systematic, strategic minds with focus levels rocket high. I'm praying now. I'm praying I'm bulletproof. I'm praying I'm bulletproof. I'm praying I'm bulletproof. I'm praying now. I'm praying I'm bulletproof. I'm praying I'm bulletproof. Now all my people say, hands up, don't shoot. That's just how the story goes. Hands up, don't shoot. That's just how the story goes. Hands up, don't shoot. That's just how the story goes. Hands up, don't shoot. That's just how the story goes. Plans demand stand to fall back against an icy wall. Feel the cold, the world is lost in the wind, and it blows. Yes, it blows. I'm praying I'm praying I'm bulletproof. I'm praying I'm bulletproof. I'm praying I'm praying I'm bulletproof. I'm praying I'm bulletproof. Now all my people say, hands up, don't shoot. That's just how the story goes. Hands up, don't shoot. That's just how the story goes. Hands up, don't shoot. That's just how the story goes. Hands up, don't shoot. That's just how the story goes. We all wanna fly, and if we try, we might just succeed. Hands to the sky, I'm crying, don't do this to me. And it blows. Oh, it blows, it blows, it blows, 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 blows. Yeah. I'm praying I'm praying I'm say hands up, don't shoot. This is how the story goes. Hands up, don't shoot. This is how the story goes. Hands up, don't shoot. This is how we go. Hands up, don't shoot. This is how we go. This is how the story goes. This is how this is how the story goes. That's just how the story goes. That's just how the story goes. We got a problem, how do we solve them? By making a change, make a difference, to be about it more than what we say, yeah. Don't ever give up, right to stand up, right to do it your way. Sing out, I'll make them hear me. Make sure you say it louder, cause your voice matters. Don't be afraid to show it. Go ahead and stand up. Don't hold back, you're not alone. Take this chance before it's gone. For everything you believe in, you just gotta speak up, speak up.